everyone. Welcome to Old News, where the fossils are old but discoveries are new. My name is Laura Beth. I am your host, and so I'll be keeping an eye on our live chat so that if you have any questions or comments, we would love to hear from you. So please type into the chat if you have anything you want to say, and I'll keep an eye on that so that we get those questions answered. Before we get started and dive into what our new topic is today, I do want to let you all know that we have captions available. You can get automatic captions by clicking the CC button on the YouTube video. And you can get the more reliable, more accurate captions by clicking that link that I put in the live chat. And I will also put a link to our bingo in the chat, just in case you didn't have time to print that out. And so I know you can see him, but I will formally introduce our paleontology expert, Dr. Christian Kammerer, the museum's research curator of paleontology. So hey, Christian, I hope that you're doing well.
Hey, Laura Beth. Same to you. Happy to be here, as always.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, I'm so excited. And also stick around, y'all, till the end, because we do have our old Newsies, silly superlative awards. Christian doesn't know the winners yet. I do. You all voted for the winners. So, stick around and we'll announce the winners at the very end. But yeah, I think that's it for me. So Christian, go ahead, dive in.
All right. Yeah. Well, first, I'm excited about the old Newsies. I've got, hopes that some will win. We don't know. And, it all comes down to the jury vote. But for this week, the topic that unfortunately did not make it in time for old Newsies qualification. Going to be talking about something that is it's a really important part of modern ecosystems for sure, but is not super well known or appreciated in terms of the fossil record. And we'll also talk a little bit about why that is. But first, just as some background, let's look at our time scale, geological time scale, as we often do. So just as a refresher, things towards the bottom are older, things towards the top are younger, have sort of the entirety of Earth history on the left, and then just the Phanerozoic, which is basically when complex animals lived, on the right. And in popular, coverage of a lot of, extinct time periods, we often use sort of shorthand to describe certain periods or eras. Like, for example, the Devonian is often called the age of fishes. The Mesozoic is called the age of reptiles or the age of mammals, or rather the age of dinosaurs. And then it's the Cenozoic that's called the age of mammals. And indeed, we're still in the Cenozoic right now. And, we are mammals. We see mammals everywhere. It seems, on the face of it, to make sense. And, when you look at sort of, popular depictions and art of these time periods, they're focused on those groups. So this is the famous Peter Zallinger mural at the Yale Peabody Museum that is called the Age of Reptiles. And sure enough, those dinosaurs are front and center. There is a lesser known but equally artistically impressive mural at the same institution called the Age of Mammals. And sure enough, you've got woolly mammoths, giant bison and mastodons, cave bears and dire wolves, all these sort of classic mammals. But there's a problem with this presentation of the Cenozoic, which is that when you look at extant vertebrates, so these are animals that are still living today in terms of the total number of species that exist. Mammals, there's a respectable number in the age of mammals. There's probably over 6,000 species of living mammals. But when you compare them to the birds, there's way more. So there's over 10,000 species of living birds. And as birds are, living dinosaurs, we should call the age of mammals maybe the age of birds, or even the age of dinosaurs part 2. So I mean, the focus on the mammalian extinct fauna in the age of mammals is somewhat misleading, because there were always, to our knowledge, fewer mammals species during this time than there were, modern dinosaur species than there were birds. Of course, if you really want to, pan out, fish are by far the most species-rich vertebrates. There's over 30,000 species of living fish, most of which belong to this one group, the teleosts. So really, we're still living in the age of fishes. The age of fishes never ended. And then, if you think about insects and microorganisms, it can get very, very complicated into what we're actually living in the age of. Maybe we shouldn't be thinking about deep time in those terms. But why don't we call it the age of birds, I guess, is the question that I want to pose to you. And I think the reason for that is two pretty big sources of bias in our understanding of the fossil record, one of which has to do with actual sort of, geological issues, and the other of which has to do with more social, cultural, like our human understanding of deep time. So let's talk about the geological one first. So here's a bird skeleton, just simple little perching bird skeleton. And one of the things you'll note is that the bones are very delicate and birds are usually small, and that when birds die, the skeletons very easily fall apart. And they have these tiny kind of like wiry toothpick-like bones that are very easy to crush into nothing, basically. So if a bird is, a bird skeleton is exposed on the surface, in all likelihood, it's going to be ground into dust within, a matter of weeks, which is to say that there's even like, a skeleton on the surface at all. A lot of birds are, when they're hunted, when they're eaten by predators, they're just devoured whole and the bones are digested. So when you think about, in general, this is a bias, a preservation bias against small-bodied organisms, sort of in general. So like if an elephant is killed by a pack of lions or dies of natural causes and is scavenged, even like, research has been done on this in the Serengeti for years, if not decades. So giving it ample opportunity to be covered in sediment and to enter the fossil record. Birds do not have that privilege. When a bird is eaten, it's usually just digested. If a bird's skeleton is on the surface, it's usually just destroyed. Birds actually have it even worse than other small-bodied organisms because their bones are hollow. They're filled with air sacs and sort of these empty spaces. So even compared to a small animal of equivalent size, a bird bone is more likely to be destroyed before it gets to enter the fossil record. So there's that one source of bias there. And indeed, most of our knowledge of the bird fossil record is only the few bones that are more robust and tend to be a little, more strongly built, a little thicker than the rest of the skeleton, such as their fused ankle bone called the tarsometatarsus. Here's a series of Cenozoic owls, their tarsometatarsi of various sizes. And really the majority of the bird fossil record is just isolated tarsometatarsi and sort of similar fused bones, which is much less, engaging than say, a complete mammoth skeleton. So this really brings us to the sort of the second source of bias in understanding the record of the age of birds, which is how we as humans really conceptualize what's going on in deep time and in the fossil record. So when you do think of fossil birds at all, usually it's in the context of some of these earliest birds, like the famous Archaeopteryx, both because it is known from this beautiful complete skeleton from Solnhofen in Germany, and also because it, as the first bird, it was for many years hailed as like the missing link between reptiles and birds. It still is of great importance for demonstrating that birds evolved from dinosaurs. And then some of the other like famous fossil birds, like the loon-like diver Hesperornis, is also a bird from the Age of Dinosaurs, Age of Dinosaurs Part 1, at least. So it's from the Cretaceous in the Western Interior Seaway of North America. And it's a big bird. It's around 6 feet long, and it has, it still had sharp teeth. These are still toothed birds. And so the birds that we kind of like, that we care about in the fossil record, they tend to be big and they tend to be weird or of sort of like exceptional evolutionary importance or ways that relate birds to their dinosaur ancestors, because dinosaurs are, of course, like the rock stars of the paleontology world. Like everything sort of orbits around study of dinosaurs. And when you do get into the Cenozoic, The birds that, if they're in the popular consciousness at all, it's some of these giant weird birds like the enormous condor-like teratorns from the Ice Age, or these flightless ground birds that were, some of them at least large predators like the forest racids, the so-called terror cranes from South America in the Cenozoic, which could be some of them over 10 feet tall and would have been some of the top predators in their environments. So they're big, they're weird, they're striking. Their bigness also improves their preservation potential, as we talked about before. So by not being flighted, their bones can be thicker, because a lot of, the reason birds have hollow bones is to make them lighter for flight. Whereas, big, bulky sort of ground bird bones are much easier to fossilize. So, if you open a random sort of popular book about prehistoric animals, this is what you're likely to see representing birds for the Cenozoic. But of course, this is an outlier. Very few of the birds in the Cenozoic were sort of giant monsters. Sure enough, there are like incredible birds of enormous size throughout deep time. But the majority of what you're seeing in the fossil record are small birds that look a lot like small birds do today. And really, our best view into what avifaunas, bird groups, looked like in the Cenozoic are from, this thing that we talk about a lot on Old News, these Lagerstätten, these sites that have exceptional preservation and are able to preserve even, delicate hollow-boned things like birds, sometimes even with the feathers intact. This is just showing an array of the many bird species known from famous Eocene Lagerstätte, Messel in central Germany. So it's around 50 million years old. So getting into the age of birds. And, there are a few of the big ground birds known from this site. Gastornis, which was the one on the left in the previous slide, is from this site. But most of them, if you saw them, you would not even notice you were looking at a prehistoric animal. Like they would have looked like a swift or a roller or a quail or, a small crane like it does today. It's not the sort of thing like if you were commissioning a work of art to show, amazing creatures from the Cenozoic, you wouldn't pick some of these little messel birds unless they're like way off in the distance just to kind of, fill out the art. And because of that, we don't really think of the Cenozoic as the age of birds. But I think that's, really a mistake. Like in trying to present these eras of Earth history, we do focus on kind of like what's the largest and most impressive animals, but they're not unimportant to the ecosystems, but they were not the only game in town. Like similarly in the Mesozoic, when we say age of reptiles, we often think of like, oh, it's dinosaurs, and not thinking about the thousands and thousands of species of lizards and snakes, and crocodiles and turtles that were also evolving and radiating at that time. So this is all, kind of a cautionary tale, just trying to get our viewers to think, okay, if you went to the Ice Age, it's not just going to be like mammoths and saber-toothed tigers and everything. There's still going to be, pigeons and ducks and sparrows and all the birds that we have today that are, were successful then and continue to be successful now. Their survival sort of by definition means that they were more successful than the mammoths. So keep that in mind. Before I then shift to talking about big, weird, extinct birds, because of course, I'm guilty of this myself. It is difficult to, try to focus on what we might call the boring species, especially in public outreach. Like if we had one new species of fossil quail based on an isolated tarsometatarsus, am I really going to devote an entire Old News to it? Probably not. So yeah, I do it too. But you do remember that there's a lot of isolated quail material out there. Okay, so with all that's a kind of just a lengthy caveat for talking about a large, strange bird whose authors have described it indeed as the ultimate bird. We'll let the viewers decide whether it is worthy of that title. But just to situate ourselves, so we are in squarely into the age of birds in the Neogene, in the Miocene. So looking at around, 15, 20 million years ago. And this is at a formation that's actually found in central Japan in Gunma Prefecture. So we've actually not really talked too much about fossils from the Japanese archipelago. I don't think we've talked about them at all. Japan is interesting because it includes a lot of ancient rock making it up, unlike most of the Pacific island chains. So for the most part, islands in the Pacific are of relatively recent origin and volcanic origin. So when we think about like Hawaii, where the islands are still forming, those have all, essentially emerged from the ocean in the last few million years. So it's actually, the Hawaiian Islands are too young to have fossils. There are no fossils known from it because it's volcanic rock. There are subfossils there of, some animals that went extinct within historic times, which we'll actually talk about in a bit, but no true fossils. Whereas Japan is sort of like accreted together from the remains of a lot of prehistoric rock formations going all the way back into the Paleozoic. The one we're talking about today, though, is from the Miocene. It's from a time period when Earth's oceans were much higher than they are today. So a lot of what is currently land in Japan was underwater. And so it's actually marine rocks that are found quite far inland, in mountainous regions in Japan today. And it's this creature that's been found there called Annakacygna. So this is part of a pretty diverse assemblage of fossils from Gunma that include lots of fossil fish and cetaceans, which are like dolphins and whales, and some other marine mammals. So it would have been a seabird, would have been living out in the ocean. And it's a giant swan. And I say giant, I mean, it is big. This is a swan that would have been more than 3 feet long. But it's worth considering that they're kind of giant birds even today. Like the swans include, some of the heaviest living flying birds, things like the trumpeter and mute swans. They can also have living swans, over 8-foot wingspan. So swans are big birds even today. But here it is, the ultimate bird. So this is what peak bird looks like. It was a strange creature. So this was, would have had a lot of similarities to modern swans, but it was flightless. So it's part of, one of these groups of marine birds that have lost the ability to fly and have kind of gone all in on the aquatic lifestyle. So among living birds, penguins are the best known of these. There's a number of bird lineages throughout time that have, become flightless when they take to the ocean and become sort of diving creatures. We don't think that Annakacygna was really an active diver. It probably wasn't going deep down to catch fish or anything like that. Based on sort of the bones of the skull that they've found, it indicates that it had these little ridges on the beak, a lot like several groups of modern ducks, geese, and swans called lamellae. And this is for filter feeding. So this animal would have been just sort of scooting around at the surface and using its bill to filter, small crustaceans and plankton and algae and things out of the water. So, a lot like what baleen whales do, except on a much smaller scale. Another interesting aspect of Annakacygna is it had this very characteristically upturned and very robust tail. So the authors who described Annakacygna sort of make note of this as a possible adaptation for protecting its young. So when you look at modern swans, they do indeed have, their juveniles will ride on the backs of the parents. It's very cute. And, this protects them from predators and makes sure that, they are not like falling into the water and potentially drowning early on. And modern swans, if you look at the modern swan skeleton, there aren't really any osteological correlates. So this is like bony features that we would see that's an adaptation for like having young on the back. Probably because they are mostly in like ponds and other areas of still water where they're not really, it's not that hard to be on the back of a swan if you're a little creature. For Annakacygna though, if they're living out at sea in potentially, very stormy waters across by these proto-Japanese mountains, it would be a lot easier to lose the kids and for them to potentially drown. So maybe this was an adaptation, really create a little divot there for them to stay put while their parents are sort of moving around and feeding. Also potentially, to protect them from sea eagles or any of these other predators, large fish that would have been in the water at this time. So I mentioned that there are a few other lineages of birds that have become flightless, and this is true even in the sort of the duck group. So there's a small group of ducks called steamer ducks that live in what is now Patagonia, most of which have become flightless and sort of are adapted for marine lifestyle. But the majority of flightless ducks in deep time actually are not really aquatic at all anymore. And that's part of what makes Annakacygna interesting, is that it's a specialized marine flightless duck. Because if you look at sort of these other flightless members of the duck family, like Cnemiornis here, sometimes called the New Zealand flightless goose. As its name indicates, this was a goose species that lacked flight and lived in New Zealand in historic times. So most of the flightless ducks and most of the flightless bird species in general that we know of were living on isolated islands where they had very few predators, and basically became flightless because, one, flying is very energetically expensive, and so evolution favors basically just being able to expend as little energy as possible if you can get away with it. So if you don't need to fly around to escape a potential predator or to find travel somewhere to find more food, generally just ditch it. Also, if you're out on an oceanic island, selection can actually disfavor flight, because if you are thousands of miles from the nearest other island, which may be your food source or where there's mates or where there's habitat, the likelihood that you're just going to die in the ocean of starvation is very high if you get blown off course. Whereas if you stay on your island, you're probably in good shape, at least for a while. So in some cases, you get entire radiations of flightless birds on particular island chains. Like this is a depiction of the Moa Nalo, which were a group of extinct flightless ducks, the ones on the left at least, that lived on the Hawaiian Islands historically, actually. So again, not fossils, but are known from subfossil remains from a few thousand years ago. So this whole group was wiped out when humans first arrived in Hawaii, so the ancestors of native Hawaiians. And the same is true basically of any island chain that had flightless birds. So they did not survive long when humans first showed up. And you can understand why. Like if it has no one, like we love to eat big ground birds. I mean, ducks and geese are already on the menu, but if they're bigger than normal, they can't get away, and they have no knowledge of predators, so they probably would have been very docile, just like walk right up to people. They would have been very easy hunting indeed. So the only surviving members of this group is actually, it's not a duck but a goose, the nene, that one all the way on the right, which is still, it's endangered, but there are still some of them on Hawaii today. They're the state bird, but the rest of the Moa Nalo, unfortunately, are lost to the sands of time. So Annakacygna, we don't know what drove it extinct. It may have, and for 99% of the animals that have ever lived, there usually isn't an easy explanation. Possibly as sea levels lowered, maybe as ocean currents grew colder, it just couldn't keep up. But it's an animal that's only just been discovered, so our understanding of its paleobiology and its range throughout deep time is really only beginning. So you never know, we might figure out what put a stop to the ultimate bird at some point in the future.
So, Christian, do we know if Annakacygna had any descendants at all?
It seems like no. So there's no indication of later swans that were flightless and of similar size. So most of the other swans in the fossil record can be tied to the modern swan genus, just extinct members of that genus. And we don't think that they were descendants of Annakacygna. For the most part, it doesn't seem like birds that become flightless ever re-evolve the ability to fly. So there are a few. So this is something that deals with kind of like reversibility in evolution and something called Dallow's law, as to if you lose a structure, can you ever re-evolve it? Sometimes the answer is yes, but it tends to be very rare. There's been some research done in insects suggesting that stick bugs may have lost the ability to fly and then re-evolved it a few times. But that's still somewhat controversial. Basically, as best as we can tell, is it's very easy to lose flight and very difficult to gain flight. So Annakacygna probably was the dead end. In that sense, it was the ultimate bird of its lineage because it was the last one.
Right. Wow. Actually, okay, I'll save my question for later. We have a question from Anne.
Okay.
Do you think the ultimate bird lay eggs in a nest? That's a great question.
Yeah, so almost certainly. At least it would have laid eggs somewhere. So something that we see, and it's not, it seems obvious birds lay eggs, but in fact, we should ask ourselves, why do birds lay eggs? Because when you think of a lot of other animals that normally lay eggs, when they go into the marine realm, they tend to give live birth. So we know like the marine reptiles from the Mesozoic, like mosasaurs, plesiosaurs, ichthyosaurs, these groups, those are all groups that ancestrally would have laid eggs on land. But it becomes very difficult when you're out in the ocean all the time to, haul yourself up onto the beach. Only a few marine reptile species do that, like sea turtles are the most famous ones, but sea turtles are actually the exception to that. Most marine reptiles just sort of switch to giving live birth at sea, so they can be out there all the time. Birds have never done that. Even the most highly specialized of marine birds, be they things like the emperor penguin that is, swimming in the Antarctic, or, wandering albatrosses that are going over thousands of miles of open ocean, they have to return to land to lay eggs. There seems to be something about the reproductive physiology of archosaurs, sort of the bird, crocodile, dinosaur group, that made it very difficult for some reason for them to give live birth. They seem to have all laid eggs. With all the diversity of modern birds, it's striking that none of them ever evolved the ability to give live birth. So Annakacygna would have, unless it was super, like, exceptionally weird, even beyond its ultimate birddom, it would have been returning to land in order to lay eggs. Whether it would have made like a proper nest constructed out of, sticks and materials like that, or whether like many shore birds just would have put it in like a hollow in the rocks or on the sand, that we don't know. Mm-hmm. We have no record of Annakacygna eggshells or anything else like that.
Wow. Well, you answered Anne's other question, which was, do all birds lay eggs?
Yeah.
So y'all were thinking the same thing. Is there any way for us to know what the water was like when it was swimming in the oceans? Like, would we be able to tell, like, oh yeah, they were able to survive like really stormy, rocky waves, or they were staying kind of between island chains where it's maybe more calm?
The answer is yes, but so there are a lot of ways to infer paleoenvironmental conditions in extinct oceans, whether that is looking at isotopes to figure out things like water temperature and chemistry. The lithology, the nature of the rocks themselves, can tell you about sort of the depositional environment at least like what happened the day when that sediment was deposited, not necessarily what was the normal condition. But there's type of rocks called turbidites that, are indicative of storm formation, so deposition by, heavy storms, heavy wave action. To my knowledge, I don't know too much about the Hariichi Formation where Annakacygna's fossils were found. I don't think they're in turbidites. It seems like it is just, pretty placid waters, at least when those fossils were deposited. But, if it's out in the ocean, it's going to be dealing with storms at some point.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the first picture that you showed us of Annakacygna, to me looked very much like a Disney character. So I kind of love that drawing, but it also does make me think like, what, the ultimate bird? What? But now like after you go over the adaptations, I am kind of imagining it as like a bird boat, like a really efficient one that's like, as maybe its feet are paddling. Do we think they had webbed feet?
Oh yeah, almost certainly.
Okay.
Like if we don't have, it's just, we just have the bones. We don't have skin impressions, but it seems very similar to modern swans in terms of the like morphology.
Right. Yeah. So it's just like multitasking like crazy. It's going on with its feet, in the water, and then it's got babies on its back, and it's like staying afloat even with the waves, maybe rocking, and then its head on its long neck are just, I'm guessing skimming the ocean water, but like just below the surface. So yeah, I'm imagining probably its neck being like a snake underneath the surface, and it's just like filter feeding. So I don't know. I think that's actually a pretty efficient animal.
Yeah, yeah.
Caring for its young while feeding. It doesn't have to leave them anywhere. I don't know. Don't a lot of animals do that? They leave their young while they go find food and
yeah.
Even
a lot of birds. They're not many birds who have the young adhere to them. Like there are a lot of mammals that do that. Like that's a very typically mammalian thing because we have hands. We can hold stuff. Birds have wings. They have a lot more trouble doing that.
Right.
So yeah, for the most part, even though like lots and lots of birds invest a lot of parental care into their young, they will, keep them in the nest and then go out forage, bring them back food. And maybe one of the parents is guarding the nest while the other is out. But yeah, there are relatively few of them that are able to sort of go out and do the foraging with the young in tow, making sure that they're there as well.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm impressed. And so we have one last question, and then I think we should get to our old Newsies.
Okay.
But Anne was also wondering, would the water be less salty?
Probably not. So it is, it's variable through time. And also as you're having more, as there's more of Earth's water in the ocean, you could get, just less concentrated salts. But I don't think in the Miocene it would have been really appreciably different sort of ocean salinity than it is today.
Okay. Yeah, because how long ago would that have been?
So we're looking at around 20 million years ago.
Oh, okay. So not that long ago.
Yeah, it is like the Earth has become pretty modern in most of its aspects. Like even if you looked at the orientation of the continents, it would basically be recognizable as the modern day. The only major difference is that South America and North America are just starting to form a single sort of supercontinent, connect to one another after South America was an island.
Okay.
And some low-lying areas would have been underwater along the coasts. But yeah, otherwise pretty modern.
Cool. It's always incredible to me to think about how much or how little things can change in millions and millions of years. 20 million years, you'd think that things would be like completely different on Earth, but it just takes time for all those processes to, take over and reshape our continents and our planet.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, Christian, are you ready to see the winners?
Oh, I'm ready.
Newsies? All right. So welcome everybody to the Old Newsies. In case you are new to our old news program, this is our last program of this season. So every summer we take a break so that Christian and other paleontologists can focus on field work. And to celebrate, we're giving out little awards to the prehistoric creatures that we've talked about over the course of this season, which started last September. So here we go. The first category is best name. And the participants who voted came to this top two breakdown right here. And I don't know if I even want to try to pronounce these. Christian, you want to help me out?
Okay, so we've got Proto-Melicion versus Ophiopitano.
All right, and so Proto-Melicion, that name means first honeycomb, right?
Yeah.
All right, so we've got first honeycomb versus Ophio, which means snake.
Yep.
Yeah, snake. And then Pitano comes from Joe Pitano, who is an artist, an album artist for metal music bands. And actually, this art, I was going to call it album art. This art of the creature is by Joe Pitano, which I think
it should be an album cover.
Yeah, it should be.
Someone should write a concept album devoted entirely to brittle star evolution.
Right. There we go, y'all. Hopefully some musicians out there have the idea now and they'll make it happen. All right. So Christian, which one did you pick?
I think I'm gonna go for Proto-Melicion. It's a sort of a good classic marine invertebrate name.
Okay. All right. So we've got the winner of best name is Ophiopitano.
Wow, it is. I mean, it's good.
Yeah, I know. It is a really good name, right? And we were talking about this, I think last week, right? If you had an animal named after you, you would totally, hang that art up in your wall.
Oh, absolutely.
And so that's what Joe Pitano did. So I love that. All right. Next category is best smile. All right. So we've got Jark.
Jark, yeah.
Okay. And I'll let Christian take the next one.
Paradoriferibius chronocaribius.
Yes.
And it smile.
Yeah. So Christian, which end would its smile be? It's on the left, right?
It's on the left. There's that little kind of dot looking thing at the front of the head, which is the mouth of a tardigrade.
Okay.
So it can't really move that around other than to kind of like suck on the bits of food that it's consuming. I wouldn't be able to like twist it up into a smile, or at least not in any tardigrades I've seen. But what
you could say is that it's always smiling.
Yeah, maybe.
And then Jark had these really cool teeth that were like jagged and on the outside of its beak, I believe. Yeah. All right. So which one would you pick, Christian?
I mean, I got to go with Jark just because it is closer to having the ability to smile.
Yeah. All right. Let's see who the winner was. The winner was
Yes.
Jark.
All right.
All right.
We've got one winner there.
I don't know. I think that smile is kind of creepy, but y'all voted. So, all right. Next category is most huggable. And let's see. So when we did this Old Newsies award show last year, I feel like we had a lot of fuzzy prehistoric creatures, or at least several. We didn't have any of those this season. So it was really picking between, microscopic animals up to, I think the largest was either Jark or this dinosaur here, Stegosaurus. So, yeah. And Annakacygna was in the running, even though
I didn't know, but I love that.
Yeah. Okay. So if I were voting, I would say an Annakacygna just because the babies I would want to hug,
Yeah.
What about you?
For sure. I gotta go with Stegosaurus. I think like as non-avian dinosaurs go, like that is a very friendly looking dinosaur. It wasn't big, it was the size maybe of kind of a mid-sized dog. It does have armor on it. And you maybe want to watch out for the makwakwit on the tail. But around sort of its neck, I think would have been fine. And it's just a very, very friendly looking critter.
That's true. It is very friendly. All right. Let's see who won most huggable.
Well, people going for the swans, but gives you the ultimate hug.
I don't know. I think they're kind of scary as adults. And actually, a good. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, geese are scary.
Yeah. I think there are many people who have been followed, possibly bitten by geese, get in their way. All right. So congratulations to Annakacygna. And our
right out the gate, making waves.
Oh, yeah. And you know what, Christian, we should think of acceptance speeches for these critters.
Okay.
All right, this is my favorite category, the most likely to give you nightmares. And I loved it because you all voted for Stegoros, both as most huggable and most likely to give you nightmares. And then we've got a new contestant over here. Tomlin Sonus is an arthropod.
Yeah, the Morellomorph.
Morellomorph. Yeah, we just talked about these last month in the Weirder Wonders. So that was a really fun episode if you want to learn more about that creature. Yeah, what are we thinking here, Christian?
Well, I mean, I'm team Stegoros is cute. So yeah, I cannot imagine having nightmares about Stegoros.
It's true.
I will say Tomlinsonus is very small. Like, it's a tiny creature. It would pose absolutely zero threat to us if it were alive today. But there's a more ontological fear of Tomlinsonus. Its existence unsettles us. The idea that these weird wonders were able to survive past the Cambrian explosion for 100 million years, looking the way they do. Yeah, it's the stuff of nightmares.
Yeah, that was a great way to put it, Christian. I was just going to say that when you look at it up close, it looks really creepy crawly, like the creepy crawlies that we have now. I'm not sure who the winner is. Let's find out. Most likely to give you nightmares is
no, come on.
Sorry, Christian.
Wow.
Voters disagree.
People have spoken.
All right. And most likely to succeed. The voters were very practical with this one, right? So we've got a Proto-Melicion, which is a bryozoan.
First known bryozoan.
And then we've got the tardigrade. And tardigrades are known for surviving in outer space, right?
Yeah, so I think I got to give it to Paradoriforibius on this, just because tardigrades have become known as the ultimate survivors.
And I should say this category is most likely to succeed if they weren't already extinct, right? So these particular species are no longer alive, even if they're, descendants maybe. But yeah, Christian, I think everybody else agreed because it was the winner.
Yeah,
Congratulations to the tardigrade.
I mean, if it was just down to me, I probably would have picked Proto-Melicion myself. Just because as the earliest bryozoan, and knowing that it gave rise to a 540 million year long success story of bryozoan diversification. I mean, that's a lot of success, but yeah, tardigrades, we love them.
I do.
I can't begrudge Paradoriforibius the win.
Yeah. I would even put them under huggable, if they weren't so tiny. If you make them giant, and then I just want to hug a big one. All right. And last but not least, we have a category called Prehistoric Creature of the Year. So this is kind of like just what is your favorite animal that we've talked about overall for this whole season?
Interesting that the favorite creature is also the ones most likely to give you nightmares.
Oh my God, that's a good point. I didn't even realize that. So,
They make impressions.
yes, yeah, they do. And really paleo art really helps with this, right?
Yeah.
It can totally determine how we perceive these animals.
Well, that's something we were talking about just earlier today, how much our impressions of like what was happening in ancient times is influenced by sort of the art that's been produced of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that both of these are great works of art. Very
absolutely.
But yeah, amazing. So we've got Tomlinsonis again versus Stegoros. And what would you pick, Christian?
I think, well, Stegoros is a dinosaur, so I think it has the leg up.
Yeah.
But also it is, Stegoros, very impressive discovery. Really like rewriting what we know about armored dinosaur evolution and the fossil record of Chile. So yeah, I think it is definitely should stand tall here.
A contender. Yeah, I think so too for Stegoros. I mean, Tomlinsonis is really cool, right? I do love those weird wonders, but yeah, I'm a big fan of dinosaur dog over there. And so, drum roll. The winner is Tomlinsonis.
Oh, what an upset. My goodness. I can't believe it. Well,
yeah, so
massive respect. I guess it's that, the day glow coloration. Gotta draw some fans.
I wish I had the full picture here actually to show you all, but I do not. You can see it on our Instagram, or this picture actually came from the Royal Ontario Museum. So I did have to crop it for this, but yeah, I mean, the whole picture, it's very like psychedelic, right? So maybe that's why folks love it, or maybe just because it's weird.
Yeah, that's great. I love that people are respecting these Paleozoic marine invertebrates, because they are, they are so fundamental to so much of our understanding of the fossil record and indeed evolution in general. As much as stories about dinosaurs are important and get into the newspapers, like if you read a paleontology textbook, like 90% of what's written in there is based on marine macroinvertebrate records and analyses thereof. So like Tomlinsonis and the crew are doing the hard work to help us learn about the past.
Yeah. Well, thank you all for voting in our old Newsies. And yeah, I had so much fun, Christian, this year talking about some new stuff. We got into the microscopic paleontology world, and we hadn't done that before in previous seasons of Old News. So that was really fun. I know I learned a lot. Yeah,
well, I'm always so happy that there's such a diversity of sort of paleontological topics in the news. But also, yeah, it's good to branch out a bit. And, that's something that we will try to continue to do into the future. When there's exciting dinosaur and ice age mammal news, we'll be sure to bring it to you, but like gonna bring, fossil invertebrates, who knows, maybe next year we'll even have some fossil plants in the mix.
Oh my gosh.
Steel thyself.
Yeah. All right, everyone. Well, thank you so much for joining us today and for this whole season. And we will, like I said, we're taking a summer break, but we'll be back in September. And if you'd like a little, email to remind you when we start back up, there's a link in the video description where you can share your email with us, and we'll let you know when we start back up. And yeah, Kate says, learned so much this season. Thank you. Thank you, Kate. I did too. I learned a lot. I'm with you guys. I don't know as much about paleontology, so I did learn a lot. Yeah, have a great day, everybody, and have a great summer. We'll see you in September.
Have a great summer. Stay safe out there.
Bye.
Bye.